Okay, first things first, we need to feed our starter. I keep my starter in the fridge because it keeps it cold, it slows down the bacteria. You don't have to feed it as often. If you keep it out on the counter, you've got to feed it at least twice a day. In the fridge, I can pull this thing out once a week, once every 2 weeks. I think I've even gone a month without feeding this. Came out, fed it, and it was doing just fine. So I'll pull it out. I only leave about that much down in the bottom of the jar. And then I'll put it on my scale. Then I'll zero out my weight. Now I'm gonna add equal parts flour to water. Okay, so equal parts flour and water. Now I'm just gonna mix everything up, really incorporating the old scrapings from the sourdough starter that's been sitting in the fridge. So I'm just gonna do a big spoon here. So I always use a piece of tape to track the progress of my starter. Everybody's starter is a little bit different, how fast it grows or how slow it grows. And you want to catch your starter on the rise when you're going to bake with it. So I've been doing this for so long, I know approximately when it's going to be doubled and it's going to be ready to use for a piece of bread. So I just keep a piece of tape. You can also use a rubber band that you can put around the whole jar. So I'll put the lid on just loosely here, and I'll take my tape and I'll put it just even with wherever my starter's at. So just about right there. So we've waited for our sourdough starter to rise, and now we can tell that it's ready to bake with because I know for time purposes that it's doubled. With the scale here, I've got it zeroed out with the bowl on top. And we're gonna add 160 grams of sourdough starter. Then we're going to zero out our scale, and we're going to add 230 grams of water. Now that those are incorporated, I'm going to mix it with my fingers to get the sourdough and the water to mix and start to bond. I'll let this sit for about 15 minutes before I add the next ingredients. Now that it's sat for 15 minutes, we're going to put it back on the scale and add our salt and flour. So we'll put it back on our scale, zero it out. We're going to add 5 grams of salt. And 400 grams of flour. So now that we have all of our ingredients in the bowl, we're gonna mix it into a rough dough, and then I'm gonna put it on the table and I'm gonna show you how to knead it. If you don't have a KitchenAid, you can knead it for the entire time, but if you do have a KitchenAid, you can put your dough hook attachment on, set it at about 2, and let it knead for about 10 to 15 minutes. So I use my bread scraper here, and I'll just start to incorporate everything together to make the dough. Sourdough is an incredibly wet dough, so if you're used to working with yeast, you're going to notice that this isn't quite like what you're used to. So it's okay for it to be really sticky to get on your hands. Just keep going with it. It helps if you put some flour on your hands to make sure that you flour your surface. Choose to knead by hand. The technique that I like to use is I like to put my hand into it like this, and then I'll kind of push and fold it back on itself just like this, and then maybe rotate it about 90 degrees. Just doing this over and over again to incorporate all these ingredients together to make this dough. Depending on how strong you are and how aggressive you are with your kneading, this will take about 10 to 20 minutes. If you have a KitchenAid, you can also do it using that. So I'll take my dough, put it back in my bowl, attachment, set this to about Okay, so our bread's been going for about 10 minutes, so we're gonna check it. Let me get my hands a little wet. Kind of scrape this off of our dough hook. Pull this out here. What I'm going to do now is called the window test. We know that our bread is kneaded enough. We're going to put it into a bowl and then we're going to set it to bulk rise. So I'm going to do my best to get it into the shape of a ball. Lay the bottom of a container with olive oil, just a little bit. Place our bread in there. And we're looking for this to double in size. We'll check back in about 2 to 4 hours. Okay, so we waited for our bread to bulk rise and it's doubled in size. It's been about 3.5 hours or so. So we'll take it out of the bowl and we'll knock back all of the air. You can dust a surface with flour. We're going to get this back to its original size. Okay, now we're going to shape the bread. And there is so many different ways to shape a piece of bread. This is the way that I learned, but there's many different ways to do it. You're basically just trying to get air into the center of the bread. Each corner and bring it over, fold it to the middle, or rotate, bring it over, fold to the middle, fold to the middle, and then with the last one I'll go all the way over. And kind of just make this into a ball for it to proof. Just trying to seal these seams on the bottom. And we'll just let that rest for about 15 minutes. Okay, so we've let our bread bench rest for a little while just to seal that seam on the bottom. And we're going to put it into our proofing basket. I have a proofing basket that was made for this, but you can use anything you want. You can use a pot, you can use a box, anything that's going to keep the bread shape. So once I put it in here, we're going to leave it to proof for about 2 hours or so. And it's getting pretty late tonight, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to put it into the fridge. And you can leave this to proof overnight and it'll do just fine. The coldness is going to slow down that bacteria process. And I'll pull it out in the morning and we'll bake bread. So I like to put just a dusting of flour over the top of it. And then I like to Put some saran wrap over the top as well. And again, either out on the counter for about 2 hours or in the fridge overnight. It's the next morning. We just pulled the bread out of the fridge and we're going to see if it's proofed enough. And how I like to do that is called the poke test. So when you poke the piece of bread, if you poke it and it just stays indented, you know you've overproofed it, and well, better luck next time. If you have not proofed it enough, when you poke it, it'll spring back. But if it's right, you've catched on the rise. If you poke it, it'll come back, spring a little bit, but won't all the way come back to its shape. So we'll do this. That looks pretty good. See if when I poke it, it comes back, but not all the way. That's a pretty good sign that it's ready to go. So we'll preheat our oven to about 450 degrees. 450 degrees. I like to use a Dutch oven when I'm cooking my bread. You can also use a Pyrex dish, anything that your bread's gonna fit in with a lid. The reason for that is because it's gonna self-steam itself. If you don't have something like that, you can also put a tray of hot water in underneath the bread and it will steam over the time it's cooking. I always put my Dutch oven in to preheat with the oven. Place our bread inside. And it's important to get a pretty tight seal with the lid. And put it again. Okay, looks good. So we'll leave the top off and let the top brown. Okay, so it looks pretty good right now. One little trick is I like to just open this up, turn off the oven, and let it coast all the way down to get that really good crust on your bread. Okay, so the oven's coasted almost all the way down, it's a little more. And then there you go. There's probably not room in there. I'm not ready.
Oh.